As a past life regression therapist, it's given me a new understanding, studying quantum physics and quantum mechanics, a new understanding between reincarnation. It's significantly enhanced my effectiveness during past life regression. He believed, because he had memories of a lifetime spent as a fighter pilot, again in World War One, where his plane went down in flames over France. The one I did very recently was this young lady who had a fear of being in a gas explosion. And she went back to a lifetime lived in England. A fellow came into my office. He says, well, I have this back situation, this bad back. And he also said, I'm on the verge of paranoia. We did a past life regression. He went back to a lifetime he lived in the 1880s. When I brought him out of the session, the hypnosis, his pain instantly disappeared and his feeling of paranoia disappeared. A between life session is, in many cases, a facilitated near death experience. I've done a session before with people who have had near death experience because they often forget a lot of what happened during that near death experience. And I can lead them back through the NDE. And after more than 40 years in this profession, it's given me a more nuanced understanding of the soul's journey.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
I am here with Brucekaloski. He is an internationally recognized hypnotherapist, past life regressionist, and he has an interesting life studying not only the after death, but also reincarnation. Hello, Bruce. How are you?
Well, hello, AJ. It's a pleasure to be here.
You were the co-founder and past president of the American Board of Hypnotherapy, and
Sure.
you've also been involved with reincarnation and past life. I want to ask you
Yeah.
about specific cases of reincarnation that really shocked you and transformed you and also convinced you that reincarnation is a true event.
Let's talk about one I had many, many years ago. A fellow came into my office, and he came in for not for past life regression. He came in for uh, test taking. He was taking a civil service exam. Sitting in my office, and he was going like this, very tense. And I said, anything the matter? He says, well, I have this back situation, this bad back. The doctors can't figure out a reason. I said, oh, that's interesting. And he also said, and while we're talking about it, I got this situation where I'm on the verge of paranoia. I always feel like there's somebody behind me, somebody behind my back coming up on me. Okay. And I generally, if I'm doing hypnotherapy, I generally don't try to mix the two because a lot of people, you'll offend them, used to be back then, with trying to bring up past. But he brought it up to me. He said, I've been doing some reading on reincarnation. Do you think this could have anything? I said, you want to find out? I said, sure. So next time he came back, we did a past life regression. He went back to a lifetime he lived in the 1880s as a fur trapper in Colorado. And he was encroaching on Indian land, Indian territory. The Indians didn't like it. So they called him in for a powwow. And they sat around the tent and teepee and had a powwow, and they made an agreement. They agreed that this trapper would be allowed certain part of the Indian land to trap on, but not these other parts. This part he would. They smoked a peace pipe, made an agreement, whatever it is they did back then. But there was one renegade Indian who was not in favor of dealing with the white man. So while he was leaving, when he left the teepee and was walking toward his horse, this other Indian crept up behind him and tomahawked him in the back. And that was it. He died a couple of days, horrible death. So knowing that, when I brought him out of the session, the hypnosis, his pain instantly disappeared, didn't come back, and his feeling of paranoia disappeared. He was right. He was always looking behind him. Why was he looking behind him? Because in another lifetime, someone snuck up behind him and tomahawked him. That convinced me that, well, I knew that a long time ago. That's one of the things that convinced me.
Your father had a past life memory, right?
Yeah, he did. He was a fighter pilot during the war, World War II. He flew P-51 Mustangs in Europe, the European theater. His plane, his engine quit over the English Channel. He went down, shattered his leg up pretty bad by bailing out of the plane, ended up on a Nazi-occupied France, French beach. Some farmers took him in, and that was basically the end of his military career. He was mustered out a couple of years later after about 30 operations. But we owned, after that, my family bought an airport on Long Island. Because my father was a pilot, he could still fly. And he was the pilot there. But he also used to do hypnosis. He taught himself hypnosis. There were no schools back then. You taught yourself how to do it. He bought books. I used to watch him hypnotize his students, because he was an instructor, to pass the FAA flight exam and also the practical exam that you take, the actual flight exam. There's the written exam and the flight exam. I used to watch him do it. And once I found a copy of a book called The Search for Bridie Murphy, which talked about reincarnation. And I asked him about it. And he said, and he explained the concept of reincarnation as best he could. He believed, because he had memories of a lifetime spent as a fighter pilot, again in World War I, where his plane went down in flames over France. And he wasn't as lucky as he was in the Second World War. He died. So he believed that he came back and again was a fighter. That's how I initially got interested in it. I did my first past life regression in 1970 with my cousin. Didn't know what I was doing, but because I only read a few books, got my formal training later on. So I've been doing it for a long time.
What other cases would you like to mention that really impressed you?
One I did very recently was this young lady who had a fear of being in a gas explosion. And she went back to a lifetime lived in England. I think it was around the 1890s, because she felt it was the 1890s, horse-drawn carriages and whatnot, no cars. And she found herself, she was only a few years old, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she was in a gas explosion. And she died in that explosion. The house fell in on her. She smothered to death. And so we helped to get over that. And that was an example of past life therapy. We were just talking about being able to reincarnate into the past. I had one client who spent the same lifetime. It was a female, but she spent 3 lifetimes as a male, and I believe it was in the 1920s Paris during the art scene. One of the lifetimes she spent back there was as an artist. The other one was as a writer, and it might have been an art critic or something. I forget. But anyway, she spent 3 lifetimes as males back there. Same time frame. Why? Because she enjoyed it. She liked it so much. She liked the energy of the 1920s in Paris. She wanted to go back there time and time again. And apparently they're able to do that.
How do you explain the fact that people can remember their past life during hypnotherapy?
There's 2 types of ways to remember your past lives. There's spontaneous recall, which is not unaided, unassisted. It could be feelings of deja vu. It could be reading a book and all of a sudden having a vision of that book. It could be feeling a sense of simpatico with a person that you just met, or not standing that person. There's many, many examples of spontaneous recall. However, in facilitated sessions, which is what past life regression is, via hypnosis or guided meditation, same thing. There's no difference between hypnosis and guided meditation, except one you use the word hypnosis, the other one you don't. Now we're able to access the subconscious mind, which is the recipient of these memories, and make them available to the conscious mind. That's how I explain that. It has to be facilitated by someone who's experienced, like myself, who knows how to do it, how to get them into that altered state of consciousness, which we call hypnosis, and represents a certain level of brainwave activity, beta or theta, and knows the right questions to ask to bring out these memories.
During these past regression sessions, have you taken people in between lives?
All the time. That's a very there are several different types of past life regression. One is just a basically informational session. Who was I? Where was I? What did I do? How did I live? What kind of business was I in? Things like that. Very dry, but it's for a purpose, because these are generally things that are historically verifiable. Next type of past life regression, which I do, because I believe one size does not fit all, is karmic connection. I go back to the lifetime that is directly connected to this particular lifetime. We look at things as our relationship to our spouses, to our jobs, to our likes, our dislikes. How are they karmically connected? Does what happened in that particular lifetime affect this particular lifetime in those particular areas of work, career, home? Next one is between lives. Now, my between lives session is like getting two sessions in one. I take the person back to the lifetime lived directly prior to this one. We do a general overview of that past life. Then I use that past life as a segue or a jumping off point into the time period between lives. Okay, now, one way in between lives, we examine things like the spirit guide, the meetings with the spirit guide, their life review. They get to meet their soul group. I think if you don't know what a soul group is, it's the souls that we travel with through lifetime. Many of them show up as a different character, and it's like a play. They show up from lifetime to lifetime. We experience planning called birth planning, this particular life, and learning what's it all about. What's it all about, Alfie? We get to meet with the Council of Elders, which on the hierarchy of things are above us, because we're on the lower end of the totem pole. Because whoever oversees this thing, if you want to call them God, the consciousness source, and the higher end, it's like a corporate structure. Then there's different levels between them. Above the spirit guides are going to be the Council of Elders, and they are tasked with guiding the spirit guides and also guiding us to a certain extent. We get to meet with them. We get to ask them 3 questions, and I help my clients devise what questions they want to ask. They may ask, a lot of them ask, what's it all about? What am I meant to do? How am I meant to do it? What should I be doing? So that's what we do in a between lives. Last type of session, by the way, is past life therapy. Let's say a person has a particular problem that is really nagging them, a fear, a phobia, self-esteem issues, self-confidence, addictions, whatnot. We go back to the lifetime directly responsible for that particular presenting problem, and by examining that, having that person relive that past lifetime, we can, in most cases, remove that particular problem. What's the effects on the person?
What you just mentioned coincides with what people experience in near-death experiences.
A between life session is, in many cases, a facilitated near-death experience. It has very many things in common with a near-death experience. The one thing it doesn't have in common is that you get to go back. I also take the client through the birth experience into this life, so they'll experience that, being born into this particular lifetime. But that doesn't happen in a NDE, does it? So it has all the earmarkings of an NDE except a return to that particular lifetime, or reviving. That's why I call it a facilitated near-death experience. I've done a session before with people who have had near-death experience, because they often forget a lot of what happened during that near-death experience. And I can lead them back through the NDE so that they can revivify or re-experience the particular NDE.
Can you mention those 4 types of regressions?
You have the informational regression, which is pretty cut and dried, just facts and figures. Then there's the karmic connection, looks at the life as the most karmically connected to this one. Then there is the between lives, which goes back to the lifetime directly lived before this one, does a brief overview, but we spend most of our time in the between life stage. And the other one is past life therapy for a specific presenting problem.
How do you explain the cases of young kids who, at 2 or 5 years old, they remember their past? These have been studied by Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker.
Now, it seems to be that they start having those memories about 3 or 4 years old, or at least being able to relate the memories. Who knows? They may have one before they can talk, relating the memories, and then they lose it by about 6, 7, or 8. It's gone. And if you ask them, do you remember when you said this and you talked about this lifetime? They'll look at you like you had 2 heads, like you're crazy, because they forgot it. I believe that there's a part of the brain that receives, like a radio receiver, receives these signals or these memories. Some people think it's the pineal gland. I don't know. But I do know this, around the ages of 7 or 8, the skull starts to harden. Okay? So maybe when the skull hardens, they're not able to any longer receive those spontaneous memories, and then it's gone.
How do you explain the survival of human consciousness after death? And not only in the case of reincarnation, but also in near-death experiences.
To discuss anything of these topics, be it reincarnation, near-death experiences, some would even say STEs, spiritually transformative experiences, anything like that has to begin with the discussion of consciousness. Consciousness is not solely dependent on the brain. It's universal. It's an internet-connected phenomenon which transcends brains. It exists as a separate entity from the spiritual body and can exist beyond it. And furthermore, consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe. Most of those with a spiritual orientation consider consciousness to be synonymous to the soul, and they show its relationship to the impermanence of death, the afterlife, and what might be beyond the afterlife, which is reincarnation. I'd like to advance my own unified theory of reincarnation, which takes out of the realm of New Age, metaphysical, call it wings of woo-woo land domain, and provide what I hope is a theoretical quantum physical framework, for this concept of reincarnation. We're going to suggest how reincarnation might work on a practical, fundamental, and mechanical level, and how it might be supported by certain principles of quantum physics. If we want to consider and continue with quantum mechanics, we should start with something called entanglement. You're familiar with that, aren't you, AJ?
Of course, yes.
Entanglement. And we'll also be discussing later on, which we'll be discussing that in depth later on, but entanglement is often evoked to support the possibility of non-local nature of consciousness. In short, when the body dies, consciousness ceases to be in the now dead brain, but it continues to exist independent of the brain as an external property of the universe itself. You see, our consciousness kind of tricks us. It's a trickster. It tricks us into perceiving a false duality of self and others, when in fact, there's only unity. We aren't separated from other aspects of the universe, but we're an integral and inexplicable part of them. And when we die, according to the theory now, we transcend the human experience of consciousness and its illusion of duality, and we merge with the universe's entire and a unified property of consciousness. So ironically, think about this. Now think about it. I want your viewers to think about this. Ironically, only in death can we be fully conscious. That lends new meaning to that familiar New Age hippie mantra. Remember that one? One with the universe. We are one with the universe. Now, enter to explain this and give it some kind of scientific credence. Two of the most forward and controversial researchers in the study of human consciousness. There's Dr. Stuart Hameroff. He's an American anesthesiologist and professor at the University of Arizona, and he directs the Center for Consciousness Studies. And then there's Sir Roger Penrose. He's a British mathematician, mathematical physicist. I didn't know that existed. Philosopher of science. He's also a Nobel laureate. Now, they work together and separately. And work done by Hameroff and Penrose have led them to theorize that upon the death of the body, the quantum information, so we're talking about information here, just like a computer has information and can be sent, I can send information from my computer here in Southern California to your computer in South America very easily. Snap of a snap of the fingers. So the soul is also quantum information, and it inhabits, the soul inhabits the nervous system, leaves the body, dissipates into the universe. And think about it. That view is consistent with the first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy. We all learned it back in high school physics, right? That states that energy can neither be created or destroyed, but it's only transferred or transformed from one form to another. So, in their view, Hameroff and Sir Roger, consciousness resides in what's called the microtubules of the brain cells. Now, these are protein polymers inside brain neurons, microtubules. So now we have a theory of where consciousness might be located in the body. Now they start to say, well, yep, this is where consciousness resides. Could be. They theorize that these microtubules are the primary sites of quantum processing in consciousness. In the context of consciousness and its survival, this principle implies that the energy associated with consciousness would also abide by the law of conservation of energy. As a form of energy, why should it be any different? It's energy, it's information, and it can be dispersed to the universe at large in a non-cohesive form. So upon death, this information is released from the body, meaning that the consciousness goes with it. Now, these two scientists argue that our experience of consciousness is the result of quantum gravity effects in these microtubules, a theory which they call orchestrated objective reduction. If a patient dies on the table, operating table, wherever, okay, and they die, quote unquote, and then they're resuscitated or they're revived, this quantum information which left the microtubules can now go back into the microtubules, as long as it's not, days or months later, obviously. And the patient's going to wake up and say, hey, I just had a near-death experience. If they're not revived and the patient dies and they can't be revived, then it's possible that this quantum information can exist outside the body. Doesn't have any place to go back into on the dead body anymore. So perhaps, and it can perhaps abide indefinitely. And it's what we know, you and I know, as a soul. So the energy of your consciousness potentially gets recycled back into a different body at some point. In the meantime, it exists outside of the physical body in some other form of reality. Yeah, it's like a TV set. Use the analogy of a television set. The transmission signal. The television set is required. All it does, it decodes the signal, but it doesn't create the signal, does it? The signal comes from the television station. Same way, the brain may be required for consciousness to express itself. The brain decodes consciousness, just like a TV set or a radio too, okay? But it's not the source of the consciousness. The brain is not the source of consciousness. So if this theory that the body receives consciousness in the same way that a television receives signals is true, it must then follow that consciousness doesn't end at the death of the physical vehicle of the body, just as signals don't die if we take a hammer and just, smash the cable box or the television or the radio. If we destroy the cable box or the television or the radio, consciousness exists outside of the signal still exists outside of that, doesn't it? It's just not decoded. So consciousness, the same way consciousness exists outside of time and space. It's able to be anywhere in the human body, outside of the body. In other words, it's non-local in the same sense that quantum objects are non-local. Now, it starts to get really interesting because scientists have long known that matter, like electrons and protons, produce events only when observed, right? It's called the primacy of the observer. In a real world example, it's called the double slit or dual slit experiment. It's a cornerstone of quantum physics, which, by the way, left even Einstein scratching his head. It's an old experiment. It's going back 100 years. This experiment. It was and it's been formed hundreds of times in various ways. And when scientists watch a particle pass through two slits in a barrier, the particle behaves like a bullet. Because and like a bullet, it's only going to go through one of those slits, one slit or the other. However, when you don't physically watch it, it acts like a wave, and it can go through both holes at the same time. So that's interesting. The act of your observing it makes it change its form from a wave to a particle. So the light's behavior changes. The only difference is that it's being observed. Now, the Copenhagen interpretation, this was first posed by a physicist, Niels Bohr, in 1920, says that the quantum particle doesn't exist in one state or another. It doesn't exist in one state or another, but in all of its possible states at the same time. That's called superposition. It's only when we observe the state that a quantum particle is essentially forced to choose one probability, because they're both probabilities. Probably a wave is probably a particle. When you observe it, it's forced to choose. And that's the state that we observe. But wait, you remember Alice in Wonderland in the novel, Lewis Carroll's novel, Alice in Wonderland? It says, it gets curiouser and curiouser. And it does, because according to some local views of quantum physics, whenever the universe reaches a decision point in which two outcomes are equally probable, it can be as simple as I'm at a fork in the road. I can go left, I can go right. The universe itself splits so that both outcomes have equal existence. Now, we're entering the fascinating realm of alternate or parallel universes. So if your viewers have been listening, and I hope they have, the question they should be asking is, how can a particle somewhere out there change its behavior depending on solely whether you're watching it or not? According to quantum physics, the answer is simple. In a principle known as the primacy of the observer, reality is a process that involves our consciousness and our observation. The term primacy of the observer in quantum physics refers to the fundamental role that observation plays in determining the state of a quantum system. So, in the quantum realm, particles exist in a state of what we call superposition, meaning they can be in multiple states at once until they are observed. Once an observation is made, the superposition collapses into a single state, makes a choice. This principle suggests that the act of observation or observing not only reveals the state of a quantum system, but also influences that state. See, the primacy of the observer proposes that the observer and the observed are kind of entwined in a veritable dance of creation. Let's call it a tango. They're doing a tango of creation, entwined, just like two tango dances are. Dr. Robert Lanza, I want to bring up his name, because he's a medical doctor and a scientist who was voted the third most important scientist alive by New York Times. He echoes that theory. His study of physics, quantum mechanics, astrophysics, led to this theory of biocentrism. And that teaches that life and consciousness are fundamental to the universe. Life and consciousness are fundamental to the universe. Biocentrism says that it is consciousness that created the material universe and not the other way around. Classical physics says that it is the universe that created consciousness. Biocentrism, based on quantum physics, said it is the consciousness that actually created the material universe. It implies that consciousness existed prior to the existence of matter. Let me repeat that. Intelligence or consciousness existed prior to the existence of matter. Now, that's a pretty heady thought. The biocentric theory implies that death of consciousness is an illusion, doesn't exist. It only exists as a concept because people identify themselves with their body. I mean, don't you? Don't I? We all identify themselves. We are our body. Now, according to Lanza, we believe in death because we associate ourselves with our body, and we know bodies die. End of story. Only that story is false. And a long series of experiments suggest death is not the terminal event we think. Rather, it just represents a break in the linear continuity of space and time. Lanza and many others also believe that multiple universes can exist simultaneously. So actually, you know, that multiverse, it's called the multiverse, multiple universe, multiverse, as it's called, first advanced back by a Dr. Hugh Everett in 1955. He's at Princeton University. What he did in his graduate thesis, it essentially posits that at any given moment, the universe divides into countless similar versions. The next moment, these newborn universes split in a similar way. So in one universe, your viewer may be watching this show, your podcast. In another, they might be reading a book. In another, they might be walking their dog, whatever, having lunch. As Everett explained, the triggering factor for these multiplying worlds is our actions and our decisions. If we make some choices, one universe instantly splits into two with different versions of outcomes, where both positive possibilities happen, but they're in different alternate branches. Okay? The crux of the matter lies in the role of observation or measurement. According to multiple worlds interpretation, it's not just Everett's decision point that determines the branch, but rather the act of observation itself. Remember, we talked about primacy of the observer. When a quantum event is observed, the universe splits to accommodate each possible outcome of that event. Each branch represents a different outcome, and it creates a vast multiverse of possibilities. So every choice we make could potentially lead to a different version of ourselves, playing out in parallel universes. Even possible history in the future can exist simultaneously in these branching universes. And according to some, different possible pasts can exist. So what does it all have to do with the reincarnation, the soul, life after death? According to the multiverse theory, in one universe, the body can be dead, while in another, it continues to exist. It absorbs consciousness, in other words, which migrated into that universe. How does it migrate into another universe? Talk about that in a minute. This means that the consciousness or soul of a dead person, while traveling through the infamous tunnel, we all know the tunnel, right? And I'm talking about the tunnel which NDEs report as well. Most NDEs report a tunnel that they go through. And the past life regression clients will also, let me kill that. Past life regression clients will report the tunnel that they experience in the session. Sorry. So the consciousness of the soul ends up not in hell, not in heaven, but eventually in a world similar to the one he or she once established. Okay? But this time, well, they once inhabited, but this time they're alive. They're not dead anymore. They're alive. Well, their consciousness, the consciousness is inhabiting another body. And the thing is, just to digress a moment, there is an abundance of places of other universes where our soul could migrate after death, according to that theory of neo-biocentrism. And in that abundance of places, a soul may choose to reincarnate into one that may be as close as the one they just left, according to another theory. That's an intriguing one. Now, this posits that we live our lives, past ones included, okay, within certain time periods, generally 100 to 200 years or so. For example, let's say from 1850 to 2050. And within that time frame, that period, we live a number of lives, learning the lessons, having the experiences that we've signed up to learn, an experience before moving on to another time period. Each of these lives are lived within an alternate universe or time period, almost indistinguishable from each other, except that each alternative universe was created at a critical decision point or an observation point. Okay, remember Everest theory? In this paradigm, we can reincarnate as ourselves. In other words, Bruce may choose to come back as Bruce in the same lifetime. Okay, maybe the same year that I was born. AJ comes back as AJ, if we choose, into an alternate universe, virtually indistinguishable from the one we just departed, except the fact that we might have pursued different careers, or maybe went to different schools, or married different spouses in each incarnation or universe, which of course would lead to an entirely different set of lessons and experiences. In this paradigm, the phenomenon we know as deja vu, and we're all familiar with deja vu, by the way, it translates from the French into already seen. In this instance, that phenomenon is literally true. We have already seen and experienced the event or situation as ourselves in a past life lived in an alternate timeline, close enough to the present one so as to have virtually the same events and situations. Of course, this would assume that we have the ability to reincarnate into the past. Next is quantum foam. Foam is, it's like the stuff that sits on top of your beer. But this is, in this case, quantum foam is the very elemental, fundamental construction of the universe. It's particles that theoretically make up the fabric of space-time at what's called the Planck scale, which is the smallest scale of the universe. So it's so tiny that it's impossible to observe directly. So that suggests that space-time is not smooth. Instead, it's a frothy, ever-changing landscape of tiny distortions, fluctuations, wormholes, and it leads to a dynamic, bubbly nature of space-time. I wasn't kidding when I mentioned the top on a glass of beer, because that's what sometimes scientists compare quantum foam to, freshly poured beer. It predicts that space-time is a foam of tiny regions where minuscule new dimensions are created and then fall back in on themselves. And it spreads across lightning quickness, like bubbles in a form of freshly poured beer. But, all right, I'll go as quickly as I can here. Let's weave reincarnation into this theoretical tapestry. So, as we all know, reincarnation is the transfer of consciousness or soul from one physical body to another after death. If we consider consciousness as an emergent property of complex interactions within the brain, it raises questions about how consciousness is actually transferred between physical bodies. And this leads into my unified theory of reincarnation. First, quantum entanglement. if you will, imagine consciousness as a type of information pattern that's entangled with the universe, quantum entangled with the universe, not bound by space or time. Instead, it's a part of a larger interconnected web that transcends physical boundaries. So we might consider the possibility that if quantum entanglement can connect particles across vast spaces, could there also be a form of spiritual or conscious entanglement that connects the soul of a person to a new physical form? Could the energy of consciousness be entangled with the fabric of the universe, that it finds a new manifestation in another body? Let's look at that's entanglement. String theory reincarnation. String theory offers a framework where all particles are manifestations of vibrating states. And we see that all matter vibrates to a particular extent or another. So some versions of string theory involve the concept of the multiverse, where multiple parallel universes exist. If we consider these as realms beyond our understanding, what we're saying is, when we say that so transitioned or died, or he kicked the bucket, we might actually be speaking literally and not metaphorically. These dimensions or the multiverse could house realms or realities where consciousness transitions or intertwines or interacts in intricate ways, including the possibility of reincarnation. And last we mentioned was quantum foam. So in quantum foam, we theorize that this suggests that in some way, the quantum foam represents as the interstaces between these physical dimensions. And like the quantum foam could be seen as that ever-changing canvas through which multiple lifetimes could emerge and dissolve just like bubbles. So that's the way I connected to that. Now, who determines who's going to go what or who's going to go where? If you remember, we talked about the observer, which says that the act of conservation can alter the state of a quantum system. Now, this idea has led some to speculate about the role of consciousness and the very structure of our unfolding events. Now, that opens up philosophical discussion. So some have hypothesized that if consciousness can interact with the fabric of reality on a quantum level, could the quantum foam be the bridge between the physical existence and the non-physical afterlife in which we can sculpt or design incarnation? In other words, can we actually create our own incarnations? You ever think of that? Create reality in both this life and the afterlife, including reincarnation. So this suggests that the script of our lives are not preset, but they're actively shaped. They're the plays that rewrite ourselves. We're writing the scripts. So at the level of quantum foam, we're speculating that tiny wormholes, which could form and disappear spontaneously, possibly connecting different points in space-time. And we suggest that these wormholes could, in theory, link different universes or allow for travel between alternate realities. These wormholes are often thought of as being quantum bridges, which makes me wonder, as having done this thousands of times, if that tunnel and the white light that the clients generally see, even in an NDE, but particularly in the past life regression, both applies to NDEs and past life regressions. And might they be consciousness experiencing and perceiving these wormholes and quantum bridges and traveling through these holes, these wormholes and quantum bridges, to enter a new consciousness? Think about it. One of my theories is that there exist certain vibrational compatibilities or sympathetic matches that our soul or consciousness are drawn to when in this disembodied state, the consciousness is out there, it's left the microtubules, with a variety of factors involved. It involves such things as past relationships with members of our soul group, residence with certain time periods and certain places, genetics, skill sets, body types, lifestyles, and so on. And that lends a new significance to the Italian word simpatico. So in this theory, we, or our souls, are the traffic cops. And along with being the traffic cops, it turns out, as we've seen, we might indeed be the grand architects of our own cavalcade of lives. So I'm suggesting that our soul, our consciousness, possesses the ability to design our next life, as well as the one we're still living in to a certain extent, and in the afterlife, and also in between life states.
So we are actually, according to this, co-creators of this reality and practically of all the other realities,
All
right?
the other reality, the next reality, and all of the realities that branch off from that in the multi-universe theory. Remember multi-universe, all the branching. One branch goes off, but then it's like a tree, right? And that branch also has other branches. So our consciousness is the creator of all those other realities. That's a pretty heady thought.
Right.
And it can choose to reincarnate into whatever time period we wish, and it can even do a replay of the life that we just lived.
You are also teaching others these techniques.
I've been teaching for 40 years on how to do past life regression. I just decided to join the 21st century, and I just released an online, on-demand, self-paced program, what they call evergreen these days. And you access it off a platform, and I offer a free year's mentorship, so they're still going to get me if they get stuck at any point. But it has about 23 different modules in the course. Those are audio modules, and about over a 300-page manual, but about 70 or 80 scripts in the manual, so that they become a board-certified past life regression therapist. I'm also working on one. I'm also in the middle of one, just like it, but this will be to help a person allow a person to become a certified clinical hypnotherapist. Some people may just want to be a hypnotherapist and work with people for weight loss and smoking cessation and things like that, pain management. Others want to take it to another level and do past life regression.
If someone watching this video is interested in learning this, how can they contact you, or what should they do?
Contact me at through email, which is Dr. Kaloski, you'll probably write that out of there. drkaloski at gmail.com.
Okay, I'll include it in the description.
They can also find a lot of information on my website, which is drkaloski.com, drkaloski. They'll find information about the individual sessions and also about my training programs.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I think this is really an eye-opener.
Well, let me tell you this, AJ. As a past life regression therapist, it's given me a new understanding, studying quantum physics and quantum mechanics, a new understanding between reincarnation. It's significantly enhanced my ability, my effectiveness during past life regression in ways too numerous to mention. It'll take another hour here. We're not going to do that. Quantum mechanics with its principles of entanglement, superposition, observer effect, string theory, quantum foam, non-linearity of time, offers a profound framework for equipping a therapist with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the soul's journey. It's able to give me a different approach to use. And after more than 40 years in this profession, it's given me being able to do more successful and more transformative experiences for my clients.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.